This podcast is recorded on Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded.
Tom, Celeste, me.
Who goes first when they say their name?
Welcome back to the Radical Online Leftist Pipeline podcast. I'm Mitch Alexander.
I'm Tom Tenneke.
I'm Celeste Little.
And I'm Purple Pingers.
Yeah, we did
Nailed
it.
it.
New year, new us.
Yeah.
Look at us go.
Professionals.
Thanks to everyone who sat with no episode for 2 weeks. I know there was much gnashing of teeth, wailing in the streets, protests about it. But we are back now from a quick break because it was fucking Christmas and New Year's. And look, doing a podcast then. It was hot as well. No, but we did put a call out for this app as a nice fresh start to the year 2025 of like questions listeners might have at this early stage of the pod. And we got a whole bunch of amazing ones. Thank you. Keep them coming. We want to read them out every week.
I didn't know that. That's sick.
That is good.
So I'm the only one that's been checking. All right, good. I think I'm the only one that can. But one of the ones that we got quite a bit, which I'm humbled by, but also I think share with some of you, just feeling a bit weird about, of just like a lot of people going like, well, who are you? Tell us about yourselves. What's the go? What are you doing? Why are you doing this sort of stuff? And so I'm always a little bit like, I don't like, part of me is uncomfortable talking about myself and big noting myself, like writing a resume or a cover letter. But another part of me fucking loves talking about myself. So yeah, I'm conflicted with this. But I think, this is a good sort of opportunity to lay out sort of who we are, where we come from, what we do, why we want to do this as well. So let's start. Tom, who are you?
Well, you know what I was going to say, Mitch. Like I was speaking to a mate. I mentioned this to you the other day. I was speaking to a mate, and they were in December when I was down in Melbourne, and they were saying that knowing of many of us who are on this pod as they do, they like the idea that there's people with specialties. You know what I mean? Subject matters that there's a bit of that they have a bit of notoriety for specialising in. You know what I mean? There's several, 4 people who can all lay claim to that, all talking. So, you don't have that effect here if you know what we all have been up to, where you think, this is just 4 people who've deigned to assume that we must hear their voice every week, which is, fair enough. Like that some of the world's most successful podcasts feature like a guy who deigned to assume that. So it just depends on how many other people assume that with you. But I think all that's predicated on people knowing who we all are. And we've all had separate cavernous histories doing what we do. And I myself I don't know if I'm very good at promoting it. You know what I mean? So you need to tell your story to people. And I want the people that know of you guys but don't know anything about me to know why the fuck I'm here. So I got my start in the first thing that I ever did several years ago in as you'd say, anti-fascist activist satire, maybe you would call it. There was initially something I was doing in 2016 on what's called the Million Flag Patriots, which started out based just in videos, but it was an attempt to kind of undermine the then burgeoning far-right patriot movement. The flag cape sort of wearing Reclaim Australia / United Patriots Front era movement. I tried to undermine them by taking the piss out of them by pretending to be them. So I wasn't the first to do that. There was another group of comedians who'd done a similar sort of thing. But as it developed, I began going out to the rallies where they were. We started pretending to be a group. I really did do the world's first fake far-right rally, like an nationalist thing. I don't know how many people are competing for that title, but it is literally true. And got on ABC's Media Watch. This is one of the wins that the project did have. Actually got on ABC's.
This was the best.
While supporters of the 3 accused included a knight, a soldier, a capped man with a borrowed slogan, and a vocal group of flag bearers.
But hang on a moment and let's take a closer look at what those supposed supporters of the United Patriots Front were wearing. Because those aren't actually genuine Australian flags. And nor are those genuine UPF supporters. That so-called triple flag is a trademark of the Million Flag Patriots, which is a satirical group that describes itself as
the most prestigious, unbashable and patrioty neo-patriot group in Australia.
Hell, got on the ABC's Media Watch. Yeah, well, just pretending to be groups, real far-right groups, but more importantly for having tricked all the nation's mainstream media cameras into thinking we were the real deal and therefore playing us on all the news stations. That was an early 2017 thing. So it's something that I think I share with only like the John Safran, I think, Chaser, a couple of other people having managed to hoodwink them all. Well, it just happened on the fly. Did a lot of damage to that movement, I think, at that time, but I sort of later on went to do a more unvarnished and honest anti-racist / anti-fascist action group, which is called Yard, yelling at racist dogs. We had to get with the times. The face of activist far-right organised racism was changing, so we had to as well. So myself and Sean Bedlam had that going, and that was really, Yard did what it says on the tin, we were yelling, often inventive or entertaining abuse and recording it, of organised racist influences or in rallies or groups or events.
One of the best ones I ever saw of that was right after Fraser Anning got egged and someone confronted him at the airport. And it was like polite yelling, but I think they tagged you in it, or like it was at least shared afterwards, but like it was definitely inspired by your work. Some guy just went up to Fraser Anning and was like, "You're a racist. You're a weird racist Nazi, aren't you, cunt? You should fuck off forever, shouldn't you?" And like just kept going. And and like he was already on a plane out, and I reckon like every little bit helps. And so running him out of the country into obscurity, like you played some small part in that directly, Tom.
Yeah.
Like yelling at racist dogs led to this guy being just harassing him in an airport lounge.
I'm proud to say that in an anti-fascist activist sense, there's not many, outside of Germany where there's a lot of creative anti-fascism that goes on. It's such a large scene there. And obviously the language barrier means a lot of us don't necessarily know it. I know a bit about it from my, anti-fascist comrades, but a lot of it doesn't sort of translate over. Whereas, certainly in America, they're known for being very strident and very earnest, I think, and their yells often make me cringe. Whereas there's a pattern, there's a thing that Australian anti-fascists now do, and a lot of other activists in which they sort of walk along nonchalantly abusing people, often.
Yeah, just so casually.
Yeah, and every time I see that happen, I see some of the imprint of Yard, and that ain't just me going, "Oh, that was me." That was everyone who participated in that sort of movement. You know what I mean? So, after that, I've sort of done more conventional, like commentary guy stuff. I think I found a bit of a new true north when the pandemic happened in terms of looking at anti-lockdown activists, for whom I had a lot of the time I had a lot of sympathy. I had a lot of softness towards them. I was very conflicted in my feelings towards them. A lot of their things, I felt very, like I had an empathy towards them, and I didn't share with that kind of like a virulently pro-lockdown Dan Stan sort of crowd the disdain for them and this fervent desire that the pigs could go and arrest them and lock them all up. When they all walked up to the top of the Westgate Bridge and yell and sang horses, I expressed my envy for that energy.
Yeah.
And I got told off by all these assholes. And I'm like, well, you have to understand that I might provide the commentary that you are interested in seeing, which was particularly, other people took over and I lost a bit of interest as it went into 2022, 23. But I was sort of among the first, really, was the kind of first doing long form commentary and sharing and gathering together all the clips of all these rallies and talking about who these people were and stuff, But I would say, like, you might be getting the news from me. That doesn't mean that I'm the same as you. I come from a background of, like I'm the person on the streets historically that's being called an asshole by everyone sitting on their ass at home. You know what I mean? Like, so I had an empathy for them, but I did also sort of coin the term cookers, which I didn't invent, but it sort of came out into the widespread thing, became the term du jour for Australian anti-lockdown conspiracists and stuff. And so I kind of tagged as like the king of these sneering people when I didn't mean for that at all. Okay, so all up, I'm a person throughout all that who engages in direct action stuff, supports other people to do so. And I look at fringe activist types, whether I agree with them or whether they're assholes or just novel rogue fringe kooks, you know what I mean? They could be good, bad, or I could feel neutrally about them. And I've done that over time. I'm interested in participatory politics and activist politics, and sometimes like, fringe, weird, strange, sometimes horrible, but you know what I mean? Like sometimes a legalist, I'm interested in all those kinds of things. But I don't have, I'll be honest about what I'm not as well. I don't have much of a prescription for party politics, and I don't have much faith in electoral politics. I'm not speaking to three other co-hosts who have an abundance of that faith either. I know that, but I'm just admitting that I know less, and I want to come in a spirit to this pod of admitting that I know less. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to pretend that I'm a gun on things. I want to, because I think there's lots of people like me who probably are more interested in the weirdo kooks and stuff, but don't have any fucking idea what's going on in Canberra. Find it hard to generate interest. And if you talk to me about the anti-corruption commission, my eyes just glaze over. I start sleeping. It's like you've just popped 4 Valiums in my mouth. You know what I mean? It's like, I can't. My eyes roll back in my head. It's like, hypnotizing me. I can't help it. But I want to bring that to this conversation. I want to bring that energy, not to undermine anyone else in here if they are specialists in that stuff, but to be honest, you know what I mean? I want us all to do that. Yeah. I really like that thing. I like bringing my fortes as well as my ignorances,
Yeah.
But and I guess without yammering on for too long, I also want to say that I come to this podcast in a current spirit of absolute fucking despair, and I really, really mean that. Like and that's, I'm not saying I'm going to be miserable and crying every podcast. I tend to talk shit a lot. It's my nature, but I am feeling fucking bleak, to be honest with you. I've done years of talking about the fringes in Australia, but then I despair of at the uselessness of all my contributions. Like, one thing that I specialize in, I didn't really mention this for people who might not know me, but I have sort of specialized. You could read between the lines. I've talked about commentary and being an anti-fascist. I've specialized in talking about Australian neo-Nazis over the years. And I've wanted to specialize in knowing about them, trying to do something about them, and talking about what's best to do about them. But I've always said that more laws, this is just to take one example of something that's given me a big type of despair, but it's one of the big examples. I've always said, you don't make more laws. That's not going to work. It's not going to address the societal ills that make, white supremacists do well in a historically white supremacist nation. It's deeper than that. And my solution is, as a participatory politics guy, I think that what's more useful is that, we all make the town square as the people. We all need to get together and call you all assholes and determine where you are not welcome to be, and we need to get off our asses and go and do something about them. I've always towed that line. It hasn't gone anywhere. Fallen on deaf ears. Absolutely. I'm at a stage of refusing to talk to media about any stuff, unless I already know them very well and trust them. And that's about fucking none of them at this stage, because they might use my information, but then rope in, basically these countering violent extremism sort of big government types who basically, recommend more laws to deal with Nazis that are then used to deal with us. And I specifically do mean that. I've watched the same people who got the Sig Heil ban introduced turn around and now demand more laws for pro-Palestine activists, my comrades, people like me.
Yeah.
So everything that we said notionally about how those laws are going to go against you next, well, it's literally happening right now. So I despair about that. And I think, in my despair, I've moved away from Melbourne and I live up in Queensland, so I'm a bit removed from the old place where I did my direct action activism, and I feel isolated and I feel fucking bleak about it all. And I am hoping to address that by talking to comrades and good people regularly. So this podcast is actually the solution to my personal despair, because I need to get out more.
This is a session every week.
Yeah.
So, Tom, how does it make you feel?
Yeah, that's right. You are my unpaid sort of psychologist. I don't need a shrink, for this. Like, I don't need a fucking shrink, all right? I don't fucking need one. Stop trying to get me one.
Typical man. Well, see, I find that, like, this sort of stuff, just to piggyback off that, like, I've got a strong, like, anti-doomerism stance, which for me, what helped me was just this idea, just recognizing in myself that, like, I do this sort of shit because I can't do otherwise. And I know if I didn't do anything, I'd feel like shit. I'd feel worse. Like, I can either despair at the state of the world, I can despair at what I didn't do.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, I can fucking stand up and do some shit and go, well, I fucking tried.
Yeah.
And that feels better. And then doing it and talking about it later, and especially publishing it on a podcast, watching the numbers go up, also pretty good.
Well, I think I'm by my nature given to that sort of activist stance, which involves promo and, going, go to this rally, get there, and going, yeah, we got them, and perhaps hiding your failures and overestimating your success. You know what I mean? That's sort of something we all sort of do to some degree, out of necessity. You want to get those wins. But I am of that nature. I just think in isolation, sometimes I can take that long view and look at where things were in some of my niche necks of the wood when I started to where I am now and go, oh God, we're losing. Oh, no. But you do that in isolation. And for me, the solution to some of that stuff is, well, don't be so much in isolation. And I view myself as getting back out through talking to you people. And what an amazing bunch of people to talk to. You know what I mean? You all, as I said earlier, you all have fortes and things that I know I would go to each of you individually as like specialists. Oh, this person would know what they're talking about this matter. You know what I mean? And I feel really privileged to be able to hear you out about that, because I might not know so much about this matter or that matter, but I'm more than willing to shut the fuck up and let you have the floor, because I know you all know what you're talking about. So lucky me. Anyway, that's me. Hi.
Hi, Tom. I did actually have a quick question, which might not be quick, but you were talking about like the million flag march, patriots, that whole thing.
Yes.
Why did you start that? What was it about the Patriot Front and the right wing ascendancy at that time that made you go, nah, fuck it, I have to do something? And what you did was take the piss out of them. But what was that catalyst, do you think?
Okay. Okay. I think I came to my anti-racism from a lifetime of being around different communities. You know what I mean? I didn't come to it through attending political classes in university, and you know what I mean. And that's not to say anything disparaging of our younger comrades who did arrive through more theoretical matters, perhaps. But I've always felt to myself that I arrived at my anti-racist politics. It was a lifetime in the making. Everything's a lifetime in the making, of course. You know what I mean. But I remember myself in 2015 when the far-right Islamophobic movement went, and I, of course, hated them. I already had hated them. You know, in my world, I was sort of like a hip-hop head in my 20s, very druggy, party-ish hip-hop head in my view. But in my world, Nazis were people that got beat up. You know what I mean? And Nazis were just people that mates of mine would go, oh, yeah, we belted the piss out of them down in Blackburn. That was what you did with those people. That was just everyone I ever knew. That's what you did with those cunts. That's kind of they were my frames of reference. And then a lifetime of having been around various people. But I didn't necessarily think that was a guy to like, when I saw them the far-right Islamophobic patriot movement begin in 2015, I think I was very much like, oh, they're going to go away. Because I hadn't had a recent, maybe early 20s, but, I was in my mid-30s at that stage. I wasn't recently engaged in activism, so I didn't see the need until they started growing more and more. Now, I was doing a lot of spoken word stuff at that stage, and I was doing it around a lot of spoken word nights are full of Arabs. I had some Arab mates who would just go tea and poetry. That's what Arabs do. This is a Syrian mate of mine who used to say that. And she was telling me about the problems. She was a hijabi, and as was her mother, and she was telling me about the problems that they were beginning to face. And this is all as a byproduct of that movement. So I started realizing this was having consequences for real people in real time on the streets, hearing it personally. And it started making me feel a sense of urgency. So then I started looking at videos of them. But then I started seeing, and like you, as I said, it's doing spoken word performances. And I had a blog at that stage called Unguent, where I was doing videos of characters. I was dressing up as other people and doing spoken word sort of stories about their lives. That was what was interesting me. And then I started looking at these people and I realized how fucking ridiculous they were. They were, they're in fact more ridiculous than some of the, corrected some of that. The far right's very ridiculous, but they were particularly ridiculous in this. The interness on disputes that they would have with each other, the bickering, the egomania. That's some of them just like in a big druggy sweats while they were doing this video with a flag paper around them, and watching them and going, wow. And they reminded me of some of the loose cookie sort of geared up people that I had known growing up around the West. I grew up out in Milton. And so I chucked in my best in person. I went out to a Footscray $2 shop and grabbed a bunch of flag capes and this and that and what have you. And I thought, well, I'm just going to flag cape myself to the nth degree, and I'm going to pretend to be my best impersonation of one of these blokes from out in Melton who fucking they'll give you fucking what for in a minute. But they're a good bloke as well, And I did that first video, and I just did it in the same sense that I'd done the other character videos. But then suddenly I was in the thing, and so within 2 days, for someone who had like a blog and was doing spoken word nights and like 10 people are looking at you, suddenly you feel like you're like the chosen one. And this is the rush that a lot of people get when they start doing videos of their stupid fucking head in politics, because suddenly you're getting death threats from people and you're like, oh, shit. I'm so important. I'm getting a death threat. And you get to go to your friends. It is scary, mind you, but you get to go to your friends and go, I'm getting threatened. God. You know what I mean? And you feel really important. You feel like you're on the run, like a fugitive or something. And then you're getting other people conversely on the left, though, all of a sudden, who are going, you're fucking amazing. You know what I mean? You're really. And it's a huge ego boost. And then the threats were escalating. And so it was very compelling stuff. You know what I mean? You're drawn to where this, huge amount of hostility engagement is. So I just kept fucking going. And I had this real sense of I'm irritating more and more of these people. They're getting confused. A lot of them think I am a real patriot because they're too stupid to see what it's taking the piss out of them. And it was just like a dog with a bone. I had to keep irritating them more. They were so easy to irritate. I'm like, I keep making it more annoying for them until, and then next, I've got a fucking 20 Australian flags on a hills hoist, and I'm setting them all on fire at once. That was about as annoying as it got. That was very annoying.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah.
That all happened.
But it was very addictive, you know what I mean? But then also I came to see, I came to immerse myself in communities that were like anti-fascist. I learnt about the more theoretical and political stuff as I was going. So I was very rough around the edges at the start, but I came to realize that the biggest, most useful aspect of that was that I was a very big, gaudy target instead of my Syrian mate. You know what I mean? And I not to make myself out to be a martyr or nothing like that, But it did help, it did give them a big flashy distraction. And I thought, like, be a big target. You know what I mean? Like, in a sense, you're a small target because you're not of their chosen race that they can denigrate. You know what I mean? As a big white bloke, you know what I mean? I look like them. I'm making the angriest in a way, but they didn't know what to say back.
Can I throw in something, Tom?
Yeah.
Because and sorry, I'm just going to talk about you because I reckon I was one of the first sort of fans that you started getting who were actually just onto it and onto what you were doing and saw exactly what it was, and I was just sharing it everywhere. So I'm sorry, I probably boosted your numbers a bit.
You boosted my ego, actually. I was like, because I knew about you and your reputation, and I was like awestruck that the incredible Celeste Little enjoyed my content and was actually sharing it around. I felt like a lot of more like activist left sides were a bit like iffy about it. They're like, who's this fucking bloke? You know what I mean? Like,
look, the reason for that too was, and I don't know if you knew it at the time, but in what you did with the Million Flags Patriots, you actually cornered what was something that I was incredibly passionate about, which was the whole sort of guerrilla theatre movement that people like Augusto Boal were doing over in Brazil in the 70s and all of that, where you go in and you'd set up a scene, the audience, and by go in, I mean you go out on the streets, you set up a scene, the people walking past might not know that they're actually viewing theatre that's happening in the public eye. It was there to create, it was there to educate and try and move the public in a way. And, the reason I was so across was, one, I got an honours in theatre and drama. Two is that it was something that the Red Fern Blacks used a lot with the black theatre up there. Things like promoting the Aboriginal Legal Service by getting a couple of blokes dressed up as cops to start bashing into a black actor on the street and seeing if people responded, those sorts of things. And as I said, I didn't know whether you did it by accident or not, but what you did do was that by going and inserting yourself in the spaces and being the most patriot that ever patrioted, you did actually end up then stealing their media focus, stealing their messaging, it was really, really clever stuff. And I saw it. I saw what was going on. I'm like, this is gold. But I also saw the people whose heads it just went over, and I go, how can you be missing what's going on here? This is this is a fascist movement being hijacked by one of us. You should be in there getting ready. Yeah.
They were good times. I wouldn't go back there for quids. The Patriot movement was very fucking dangerous, like legitimately dangerous at that time in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was like, oh man, you only do things like that. Well, in that specific way, you don't do them for long when they're that high stakes. Well, that's how it felt back then anyway, When I look back, and I definitely did learn. One thing I learned from that time is that, I learned it firsthand or through that, is that Aboriginal people have better sense of humour than white Australians, even on the white left. I definitely, because I've often found it was Indigenous people who were just getting and wanting to have those laughs at the expense of their enemies, where there's a lot of very self-serious and really fucking punishingly earnest, like white lefties out there, Yeah.
I feel like there was a part of it too, which is like the painfully earnest journalist class that, like, it's like, in hindsight, if you look at the shit that you were doing, why the fuck would any journalist be like, now you're clearly serious. This man in like, it was like a gridiron outfit, like a half gladiator, half American football with like a flag mask on, who would just like stand there and flex while you talked. Yeah. And you've got 14 different Australian flag capes on with a singlet, stubbies and hat. And the media class are going, now we need to examine what is happening here in the Patriot. The fuck are you idiots doing?
To be fair to them, though, so you should have seen some of the real Patriots from that time were pretty shocking. Like, I'll never forget the guy in Coburg, this like enormous, our old mate was a very heavy set lad, enormous big bright red shirt and then an Aussie flag Ned Kelly helmet on. That, like, Just amazing. I'm still trying to find a photo of him. I saw him in person, at the time,
great.
but I can't find it again. But yeah, it's some really we had stiff competition. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's pretty fucking good. I remember those rallies for me as well were some of the first time like I had direct sort of connection with those people because I went to some of those rallies like at Fed Square and stuff. But I look the way I do, which is a lot like a lot of them. So I was like there on the anti-fascist side, on the anti-racist side for a while. And then I would like go in and have a chat with some of them about like, what's your problem? That's where I learned firsthand, like it's economic issues, not that you've just been pointed in the wrong fucking direction or you're a racist cunt. But like, like I got to stand in there while they sang the national anthem and just shit myself. Like it was terrifying.
Wow.
But
yeah, things are so
I feel like that was a big thing for us.
Things are so stratified, like it catalyzed along these like enormous cop lines. Now it's hard to remember that there was a time where just people would mill around through their political opponents and have sort of like now they would seem like innocent, naive chats. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's 2015 was that kind of time.
Celeste, tell us about yourself.
Oh God, where do I start? So when it comes to this crew, I am clearly the oldest. I'm clearly the blackest. I've recently
what do you
found
mean?
I think I've recently found out that I'm also the brownest. So, that's not bad. I'm the femalist. I'm ticking the minority box.
We thank you for your service. Thank you. So I got an email from Apple Podcasts being like, we can't put it up unless. Oh, okay, good enough. We're good. We got the bases covered.
I'll just cover all the other bases.
If you could take up a real niche, weird religion, that would do so much for us. We'd really appreciate it.
Look, I'm really sorry. I'm an atheist. I'm declared since I was about 13.
Don't worry, guys. I'll join the exclusive brethren.
Excellent. Perfect.
Done.
But look, where do I start? So I'm an accidental commentator is probably the best way to put it. This is going to be a story, isn't it? Recently, my mum gave me a bunch of stuff because I've been annoying her about family history and all of that. And if anyone, my blog has been defunct for years now, but if anyone does hop on it right now, they're actually going to see that I've been using it to self-publish a bunch of family history stuff that I've been finding because it still existed. I wanted a space where I could start, working through this stuff because I found a lot of moldable, interesting stuff in the family trees, and it's not really my style to keep these ideas in my head, just driving me bonkers. I do writing for me was one of the first ways that I learned to communicate from a very young age, and I say this because I like a lot of Aboriginal kids, I got so many ear infections and so many ear problems when I was little. My ears were not diagnosed. The problems with my hearing and the ear infections were not diagnosed until I was 7. So I got very competent at reading and writing, and my communication styles sort of compensated in that way. And therefore in my most formative years, I learnt how to write myself better than I learnt how to talk about stuff. So I'm an accidental commentator. But what happened with me was that somewhere in my 20s, I started writing letters to the editor quite often, and particularly in the wake of the S11 rallies, where I'd see the very racist commentating, like they, I forget who the WA Premier was at that time, but there was mandatory sentencing going on in WA, and during the S11 protest, an Aboriginal bloke jumped up on a car that had the WA Premier on it, waving an Aboriginal flag and just standing there looking staunch as anything. It was this gorgeous image that you still see used when they're talking about Aboriginal protests nowadays. But the way they reported it was just epically racist. It was along the lines of Aboriginal troublemakers involved in S11 sort of thing. So I started writing letters to the editor, and then every single time someone like an Andrew Bolt would write a column that I hated, I'd write letters, and I ended up getting published quite a lot, actually. But it then really, this is why I ended up as an accidental commentator, because every single letter that I wrote, they absolutely edited down to the absolute bare minimum and took off every single edge that I could do. And then I went back to uni, and I was doing my graduate diploma, and mainly in social sciences and political studies, because I just wanted to do some more learning. I'm a serial uni student, so I've been to uni 3 times.
Hell yeah.
I'll state that up front. But all of a sudden I had all this knowledge from what I'd learnt about the Middle East, about, historical, political, social, justice movements and all those sorts of things just floating around in my head. And I didn't have an outlet for them. And so off the back of me wanting an outlet for all this stuff that I just accumulated, this wonderful knowledge, plus seeing how the world was going, plus knowing how, my writings would be edited by the mainstream media, and the fact that there was no such thing as a mainstream Indigenous media back then. We were always, just shuffled off to the side. I started my blog, Rantings of an Aboriginal Feminist, and it was started as an anti-media site. It was kind of like, okay, here is a place where the ideas of an Arranger, hard left, feminist, everything else, anti-establishment-y type can actually live and talk about her responses to what's going on in the world.
And in what year was that?
Oh, God, 2011 or 12, I want to say. It's been,
Actually, can I just ask, my apologies for continually interrupting you, Celeste, but it is relevant to this. You've just recently, I was excited to see that the Black Feminist Ranter, as it's now called, the blog is obviously active so that you can publish your insight into your investigations in your family background. But are your older writings available still?
Yeah, all of them are still available, but I've unpublished them all. I did actually, they're all there, and I can reinstate them, but I did unpublish them all at a point, because it was kind of like the blog was defunct. Essentially, I was occupying other places, like say being a political candidate, or the amount of space that I got into the toehold that I got in the mainstream media by accident, which is what I was just about to roll into. But yeah, it also, some of the writings, I've got to sit there and go through them, because some of them I don't agree with last week me, let alone 2011
I get it.
me.
You do change, and some things you don't want that reflection of your old position. I was only asking because I was going to say to the audience that, there's acres of like incredibly, succinct but erudite, wise, staunch writing on there that I learned so much from reading you many years ago, and I talked earlier about my, immersion in the active sleep. I read so much of you back then, you know what I mean? And obviously that ain't the only place you publish. You've done so much work elsewhere and published so many places. But yeah, if anyone is not familiar with your acres of incredible writing on politics in the world, then they'd be doing themselves the biggest favour of the world by getting into it. But anyway, I'll shut up now. Thank you, Celeste.
Yeah. And look, it still exists. And, there's perhaps because I'm now using it again, I might start reinstating stuff. But I think the biggest thing with me that people need to know is that this was, as I said, an anti-media site. It existed because people like me did not exist in the media, and the internet was giving us the space and opportunity to go and steal a corner of it and section it off for our views. the one thing I was never expecting was that an editor from the mainstream media would read my piece and ask to republish it. So that happened 6 weeks after I started the blog.
Fuck yeah.
And back then, the editor that approached me was an editor from Fairfax. And so weirdly, I became, they just started up their section Daily Life, which was actually based around women's writing and progressive writing at that point. That's now defunct, but yeah, I was a columnist in that space for a while. I wrote quite a bit as a columnist for The Guardian, and I'm still freelancing in that space a bit. There's not, when I think about it, and the fact that I never actually intended on being a writer, the amount of spaces that I've ended up in is just incredibly extraordinary. Nationally, nearly every publication you can think of has published me at one point or another as a freelance writer, some of them as an ongoing columnist. It's been a bit of a trip. I've also had pieces go internationally from this start as being anti-media. So I really, really failed at staying anti-media and anti-establishment. But the one thing that was driving me all the time is that, like most of you, I came from a background of activism, a background of understanding that. I was actually born in Canberra, so I do know far too much about the political system. In fact, we had a school parliament when I was in primary school, and I was member for Little of the opposition. We did. And we also did go on excursions to Parliament House. That was very much, something that kids did in Canberra. So yeah, I knew an awful lot about the system there. I also grew up there because I was part of this great big lot of it was a massive community of Aboriginal people from across the entire country that moved into the national capital in, say, the 70s and 80s, and they were either there because they were doing tent embassy or because they were public servants or because they were both. And a lot of my family were both. My dad himself was a public servant. So I grew up knowing all of those systems pretty intricately. But the thing with knowing all those systems and them being involved in the land rights movement as a kid was that my faith in those systems is non-existent. And that has never shifted. Even as somebody who herself put her hand up to run and potentially be a part of that same system. I didn't do that because I believe that the house on the hill is where you need to be to make change. I think that change, in my brain, change always happens from the grassroots. It needs the masses behind it. You need to be networking and coordinating the movements and sharing, the resources, drawing. The masses are built by identifying the similarities and the differences, but how we can work together between various groups and making the minorities the majorities. So yeah, it's I don't know. I'm still writing. And I'm still writing a lot, and I'm still an in-demand writer. I have no social media nowadays. I don't quite know how I'm still an in-demand writer, but somehow I am.
I would posit, I would take just a stab in the dark here, is that your writing's really good.
Yeah, perhaps it's that.
It might be the previous networking you've done on social media before. It might just be your friends just going, we owe Celeste a favor. But I think it might be that the writing's really fucking great. As Tom said before, erudite, insightful, fantastic. Moreish to read. Like it's like your writing, I've always found, has this it's got such a nice sort of flow to it, and like a not a rollicking vibe, but like you want to keep reading it as you read it. It's just sort of nourishing to read. So that would be probably why I think you're an in-demand writer.
Well, I think, one of the biggest things that I learned being a serial uni student too was that there was a certain class of people that went to uni. And when I went to uni for the first time, not the second or the third, for the first time, It was back in 97, and I think that at that time I was one of 17 Aboriginal students across the entire state of Victoria who went on from year 12 to uni. So it was a place where you know, we didn't exist. I was from a working class background, you know, an outer suburban area. You know, I ticked all the diversity boxes there, but when I got to uni, not only did I just thrive in that environment, because all of a sudden there was this infinite choice of subjects that I could just hook into and go along to. And, you know, as somebody who started as a geology major and ended up with an honours in theatre and drama, I think you can see that my journey through university was quite choppy and changey until, you know, I was a science student and I realised that I wasn't and I needed to be an arts student. I was that. Yeah. But also I think that my time at uni really reinforced the class dynamics to me so much, because we'd read all of these academically dense books and, you know, these words that you'd never ever use if you're out there talking to people who had left school at 13 to work on a cattle station or had picked up a trade or whatever else. You wouldn't take some of these words out to, you know, the communities that exist within my own homelands, because people would be looking at you going, what the hell are you on about? So one of the things that with my own writing I've tried very much to do is to use plain language where possible and to make sure that people can pick it up and know what it is that I'm arguing. And I do like being able to structure an argument in that sort of written form. So one of the reasons, so writing, public speaking is something that I do an awful lot of too nowadays. I'm still out there, you know, protesting and that, but you don't see me as much nowadays. And it's just because my physicality is no longer lending itself to long marches and that. I've had a lot of problems with injury, particularly these last 2 years. Since mid the COVID lockdowns when I did my shoulder. But you know, it's still very much, I'm really passionate about getting out on the streets. I'm really passionate about rallying the masses and appealing broadly and building movements through the joining of movements. But the other thing I just want to throw in here is this. I had been wanting to do something along the lines of a podcast before. If there was one other medium that I liked, because I hated TV. I'd been on TV before. I had to get there half an hour before any of the blokes for a Q&A filming, because apparently women needed to be made up and have their hair teased and whatever else before they went on the screen. So TV was instantly off-putting to me. I just didn't like that format at all. I loved being on radio. I loved appearing on my friends' radio shows. There's so many radio shows, Triple R, 3CR, even Triple J at times, where I'd end up providing commentary, Radio National. I loved doing that. And I loved appearing on people's podcasts. It's a very sort of freeing movement. Like, none of yous know that I'm wearing my pajama pants below the stairs. It's fantastic. But also, you know, I was having a bit of post-COVID, I was having a bit of career crisis, and I'm just I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm still a union organiser. I've just done this political stuff. I am still writing. I'm a performer at heart. I need to be doing creative stuff. There were all these things and they were bubbling away. And I remember I got some career counselling just to try and figure out where my brain was at. And she goes, "Why don't you think about starting a podcast?" So 2 years after I was given that advice, I'm actually doing it. So yeah, you know, it's kind of in a way, this is kind of my way of, again, engaging in the media like I did with my blog, where I'm not residing within mainstream media space in order to do it, but creating and helping to create an anti-media space that is probably going to morph into a media space.
I was about to say, given your luck and career trajectory, find us on iHeartRadio in 6 to 7 weeks. Corporate sponsorships out the asshole, spruiking fucking Nissans and shit. Like, there'll be an ad roll right before it comes in with the Al Carlson music and acknowledgement. There'll be this pre-roll for like natural gas fueling Australian industry.
Well, this flag will have to change to product placement. I don't know.
We'll get an Audi in the background or some shit.
But yeah. So that's how I've ended up here. It's it is part of me staying engaged, being able to talk about stuff. Obviously, the Indigenous rights movement. That, as I said, I'm also a pretty hard left activist. I have resided, I've said it broadly, I'm an unaffiliated unaffiliated hard leftist rather. So I've resided more within the libertarian left edge of quadrant of the political spectrum. That's where I'm most comfortable. Being able to, being multilingual in those various sorts of forms of social justice and politics and just having an ability to respond to stuff. That's that's where I'm at. And it does come from activism.
I'd like to know, Celeste, you mentioned the politics stuff. I want to know, you also ran for federal politics, and I had you on my podcast when you did. That's why it was my first introduction to like talking to you properly. But tell why? So for me, the interesting thing is the framing of you specifically mentioning that you don't think change happens in Parliament. You don't think that that's where change actually ferments and takes place, and yet you ran to be there, like you said. So why, how, what, when? Talk about that whole bit, because that's fucking fascinating.
Yeah,
and also if you get this question for me as well, Celeste, if you could just answer it on my behalf, that would be really great.
Look, I don't know how to frame this except to state that whilst I don't believe in the system, whilst I'm, completely rah, bring on the revolution, let's go bastards. At the end of the day, I also fundamentally recognize that we are stuck in this system right now. So part of it was pragmatism and knowing that we're not going to overturn everything tomorrow. That's not going to happen. But until we're able to, this is the system that is existing, and this is the system where I can actually help provide something different within what exists. So I'm sounding really vague there, but if I can just break it down to this, I have lived in the seat that I ran in since 1997. True story, except for a break in the middle where I kind of went back to the southeastern beachside suburbs to try and camping with my parents in my early 30s. I was trying to save some money and all that sort of stuff. And I was there for as long as I could bear it before I came running back to this seat. So since 97, I have been in this seat with a break. I had seen I was there whilst Martin Ferguson was our local member, and then when Ferguson resigned, and we saw what happened with Martin Ferguson. He was not remotely representative of the people who lived in the seat, which was one of the most Indigenous seats in Victoria. One of the most Macedonian and Greek communities. So you had all the post-World War II migrant families that were still living in the area, plus the injection of Indian and and Vietnamese and, you know, these other populations that have come in, and then also the populations that neighboured us, like the Lebanese, the Turkish, all of these populations were existing around there. And the local MP was this conservative white dude who then who was a former ACTU president, who the minute he left politics ended up completely selling out the workers' movement, completely selling out,
What a surprise.
Oh my God. But yeah, you know, so when he left, he got replaced with David Feeney, and we saw that. And for me, I'm just sort of, could there have been a more blah thing to replace, you know, Ferguson with a less representative person? Like the Labor Party, this used to be the safest Labor seat in the country, and the Labor Party continuously took it for granted due to that. And so they just funnel these dickheads into the seat. And what changed for me living here for so long was I saw the seat get disillusioned. I saw this traditional Labor voting population get disillusioned and start looking elsewhere. And while they were doing that, you know, Alex Batal, when she was running solidly as a Green, was starting to engage in that grassrootsy stuff and was starting to chip away at that lead until the point where the seat nearly fell. The most safe ALP seat in the country nearly fell to a woman of colour who'd been doing it for a long time. But yeah, I think that what happened next was, you know, Feeney obviously got caught up in the S44 debacle, which I could go on about all day about where the left had their heads, you know, up their own asses on Section 44. Just read my stuff, though, because I've written about it solidly for about 5 years. When he got into that and they decided to helicopter Jed Feeney and Jed Carney, I am so sorry.
It's right. They're all the same.
Yeah, they are relatively interchangeable.
Jed, I am so sorry if you just happen to be listening to this. Jed Carney, when they helicoptered her into it, and, you know, there was even a little bit of hope for me because I said, okay, they're putting somebody in who has a bit more community contact. It's a woman. This is great. You know, she had some runs on the board from the union movement over several decades. So yay. What I thought the Labor Party might start doing is then start being influenced by the social justice politics that are identified as being really important in this seat. You know, that had just been saved from the brink, and start championing them. And I didn't see that happen. So they get someone who has actual talent in there. She's then tied into their party room dynamics, and this seat again has no representation. So my goal with running for the Greens back then was that, okay, this is a party which I had enough in common with politically that I could say, okay, I can back in your standpoints here. Think a public-owned farmer is a fantastic idea. Love all this stuff, you know. Okay, yeah, I can come on board, and I can provide a democratic challenge in this seat. And that was what I wanted to do more than anything. Plus, you know, there had to be someone with a bit of oomph behind them to actually be able to take some votes from Jed. And I was in a good position to do that due to my own public profile, my background, my union work, you know. So more than anything, the reason I ran was that it was to provide a democratic challenge, and it was to provide that challenge in the hope that if I didn't win, and me winning was a severe outside chance, but if I needed a 16% swing, so I didn't deserve the hate I got for running. But if I didn't win, that in the very least, I would be clawing some of that majority that the Labor Party had gotten back on this seat, and therefore shove this seat back into a marginal position, which would make the Labor Party more broadly more likely to listen to a local candidate who's holding this seat because they want to retain it. even though, 6.5% was taken off that lead, I can't honestly say that they've done that in this term of office. So yeah, that was why I ran. I ran to provide a democratic challenge, and I ran because I felt that I was actually more in line with the views of a great percentage of this population within the seat and could appeal to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd agree. Tom's had to run, but he has asked us to ask you a question, so I'm just going to ask you Tom's question. May Tom rest in peace.
It's so tragic every week.
Yeah, every week. Sorry, in Tom's memory, I'm going to ask this question. Can you go into the really important role you played in helping grow the Invasion Day rallies in the mid-2010s? How did that happen, and how much did you watch them grow? And I'm sorry for reading it verbatim. I just thought I had to, just out of respect.
For our fallen comrades.
What did I do? I didn't. What I did was that I noticed week after week. So the Indigenous rights movement, the protests were really going off in, say, 2016, 2015. They were just one after another. And what I noticed was there was this core group of young staunch activists, and they were brilliant. Like, I was sitting there, I was watching them, I was going to the rally, I was watching their leadership and being in pure awe of what they were achieving. And these folks, who were mostly at the time, quite young, also Aboriginal, mainly identifying as women, but if not as non-binary, and a lot of them queer as well, we're getting together, we're taking these messages to the street, and we're shutting stuff down, to the point of where, they had a Stop the Forced Closures rally when the threats of closing down the remote communities in WA because they were not serviceable according to the Abbott government at the time, and trying to force people into Geraldton and Broome and wherever else, the bigger centres from their homelands. The front page, like, they were so successful in starting and then maintaining that rally that the front page of the Herald Sun at the time cried out with, like, selfish rabble with all of these Aboriginal activists and flags and all that. And I was watching these people and I go, this is where it's at. These people are amazing. And so I was attending an awful lot of them. I remember we occupied the intersection of Flinders and Swanston till 3:00 in the morning one time when we had some of the young activists had gone and caged themselves, the deaths in custody sort of message. So they go and put themselves in a cage and then chain themselves to it. And that was the installation that we then sat in the middle of Flinders and Swanston and did not move until 3 a.m. And the cops came in, But yeah, I'd just seen their activism, and I'd seen what they'd done, and I'd seen what they achieved, and I'd seen that people were buying in. Other activists were buying in. There was a pretty steady group of unionists, of anarchists, of socialists, all the other rabble was starting to come along and do this. But the thing is, that group of activists worked themselves to the core. They were burnt out by the end of that year, and they're just sort of, we can't organise the Invasion Day rally. Sorry, we're not going to be getting this up for next year. We need a break. And I just kind of reached out to a couple of these key organisers from Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance at the time, and I just said, do you want it to go ahead? And they said, yeah, we'd love it to. We just don't have the physical or emotional capacity to do it at the moment. We need a break. We need to go up to country. And so yeah, I kind of offered to keep it going, and with their help, like, they were still giving advice and still feeding in stuff. But what happened was that through my links, because by then I'd been a union organiser for a number of years, I'd also been in the media for a number of years. So what happened was, essentially, we had that activism got married up with union activism, and it got married up with a media presence. And suddenly the notice for Invasion Day went out to 44,000 people because I joined up the, what was it? The Facebook event. I joined up the Facebook event to my Facebook page. And so everyone that was on my page ended up being spammed with the Invasion Day stuff. And a couple of the rest of the people that we rallied to kind of get this off the get this off the ground in their stead also did the same. So essentially what happened is the Invasion Day rally then just kind of went out to a group that hadn't necessarily hit before, and then it started growing and growing and growing. Oh God, I know Tom will love me chucking this story in at the end. But we also had no idea that was going to happen. I thought that perhaps we might be able to do that, but we were so ill prepared for it that we had a couple of megaphones, we had a PA system from the ETU that wasn't working, and so we're trying to talk to 50,000 odd people on the Swanston Flinders intersection. When it's 35 degrees, I think the day was, and everyone was so patient and kind and supportive, but they were also frying and they couldn't hear us. But they stayed, and they made their presence known, and it just continued to grow from that. But the thing is, when it was the Facebook event, the rallies were usually only about, say, between 1,000 and 5,000 a year. We got about 4,000 people had RSVP'd that, yes, they'd be coming. I was also the police liaison officer that year. And so when the cops were ringing me trying to get an idea of where we'd be walking and how many people we expected, it was like, give them the information, but don't give them all the information. Just leave it out a bit. And so I just sort of, I gave them the route, and I said, look, 4,000 people, according to our Facebook group, have said that they're going to come along. So I envisage that there's going to be about 2,000 people there. And this is also off the back too of the rally before had also, which I wasn't at actually. I'd been up in Alice the previous year. But the rally before became infamous because Viv Marlowe actually pulled the barricades for the Australia Day parade, and the rally people crashed through the parade and then started marching down the parade route, and all these a couple of hundred people who were there for the Australia Day parade then got confronted with the Invasion Day protesters. We did the same thing the following year, except we didn't go through the barricades. We waited until they'd passed through because there were just too many of us to contain. And then people got aerial photography so you could see it happening. It was just stunning. But yeah, so the cops were prepared for 2,000. They got 50,000. I highly recommend, it was, I don't know. It was an amazing sort of thing. And it was a marriage of what was some real core, brilliant Indigenous rights activists, most of whom were either Vic Mob or had been working with Vic Mob for a very long time. And the energy that came from tapping into other spaces which hadn't necessarily been engaged before. That's what happened. But none of it would have happened if we hadn't have had those warriors of the Aboriginal resistance out there constantly before that, because they inspired so much.
I think this is why, for me, like I've always found history interesting, but especially the last few years, really digging into political history with a critical mind to it, because in some sense, if you start the story at a certain point, you started the big invasion era, the Facebook event thing, that was the big 50,000, but what it grew from. And if you ask those people, they know what it grew from as well. And it's really important to keep that history going, because where that comes from informs what you did. And the fact that you were inspired by them to just ask them, can I help continue this? As opposed to my turn to do it, I'm going to be the next big fucking thing. It's so important to understand that context, because it frames how things happen and why they happen, and then gives you like a good foundation for what you can do next and what other people can do.
Yeah, and look, none of us would have been doing that if the day of mourning protest hadn't happened in 1938. If the tent embassy hadn't been installed on Australia Day, on the 26th of January, as it was known back then, in 1972. Like, there were all of these things that we know that came before us. And one thing that I will say about the Indigenous rights movement is that we seem to be incredibly across that political history and are constantly walking in steps of ancestors. So we're informed generationally by what they did. And I don't know if that necessarily translates, but the more that people do skill themselves up on the history and the knowledge of what's gone into this, the better that we're going to be able to build other movements.